hello, and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Luvyna Mantle.
You did.
Did
You
I
got
say
it
that right now?
100%.
Okay. Okay. Because we're just going to I'm just going to call you Lou like you told me to and not try to pronounce your full name. Because I clearly cannot get it right, even though you've told me 17 times. And before we hit record, we were just debating the scariness of hurricanes versus tornadoes, and it really comes down to what are you used to? And that came up because before we started recording, there was a tornado warning system going off
Yeah,
behind you, Lou?
we call it tornado sirens, but yeah, it just warns us of when they're coming, and then they do tests throughout the month, so we are ready, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It's like the emergency broadcast testing. But yes, that got us into the conversation of which one's scarier, tornadoes or hurricanes. So anyway, moving along. So let's start out with what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with as a child that contributed to you becoming who you've become as an adult?
I think hard work's a lot of it. Both of my parents have sacrificed and given up a lot of things for us kids. Um, they are extremely hard workers. Like both of my parents, my grandparents. I grew up on a ranch in Kansas. So if you know anything about like the farming and ag industry, a lot of us are hard workers to get just to begin with. But on top of that, my dad was building up his cattle ranch. He quit his corporate job when my brother was born. I'm the oldest of four kids, so my brother's 5 years younger than me, so I don't even know what age I was. But he quit his corporate job on just like a dream, aspiration, goals that they had, and started his own like agricultural fence business, and was running his own business, building. I mean, a cattle ranch is technically another business. Like it's like you have hundreds of kids, right? Like
Mhm.
you got to check on them every day. And like, I mean, if there's any sort of weather thing going on, then like you have to prepare them for that. Right now we're calving. So like every 2 to 4 hours, mom and dad have been doing shifts to check on calves and make sure like nobody needs help. So it's like having a whole nother family while raising four kids. So I mean, I don't know how he did it, to be honest. On the flip side, my mom gave up her dreams of being a journalist, like a global journalist, and writing for amazing art, like newspapers and things like that, to stay at home and raise us kids. And while she was doing that, like she was catering on the side and baking bread and selling it as farmers markets. Like I grew up going to farmers markets with my mom and like helping her sell products and whatnot. So that just family and hard work and being honest, like people, I that was a huge part of our childhood. Like my parents provided for us, but like we had to work for our own things too. Like in high school, if I wanted a cell phone, I had to have a job and make money to pay for that cell phone. Like they gave me a car for
Mhm.
my birthday, and I mean it was like a $700 total beater car. As old as I was, like it was absolutely nothing fancy, but I had to put gas in there. Like they paid insurance up until we were married, but we had responsibilities. Like we weren't just gonna they were creating adults that knew how to fend for themselves. And it's been seeing that difference and how I was raised versus kids I went to high school with and things like that. And just now as a parent
Mhm.
raising my kids similarly, I think they did me a huge service by giving me responsibility and holding me accountable for my own actions and kind of my own choices.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because I had similar in that, and I was in high school before there were cell phones, but I did have my own phone in my room with my own number, and I had to pay for it myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it puts life in
yeah,
perspective.
it creates yeah, exactly, and it does. It helps you understand um, about managing money for one thing and managing
Yeah.
responsibility. Yeah, yeah. Cool. So what did you do with those values as you grew into adulthood? Like, how did you apply them in your life?
Like you said, managing money. I feel like, I mean, my husband was military for 7 years, And we got married very young, like we were 18 and 19 years old. And I mean, you think you're an adult at 18 and 19 years old, and you are definitely not, like 100% not.
Right.
But like we've seen a difference in how, I mean, he had the exact opposite childhood that I had. Like there was no accountability. His parents were divorced. He spent a lot of time going back and forth between houses and grandparents, um, and things like that. So we saw a direct kind of difference in how I was raised with money management. And I mean, I taught the same to him, and we were very tight on using a budget and kind of financing and not taking out credit cards and loans that we couldn't afford and things like that. Making smarter choices, I guess, than a lot of the our friends
Mm-hmm.
that we were surrounded with that all of a sudden, I mean, they are also 18, 19-year olds straight out of high school and basic that all of a sudden are making thousands of dollars a month with the army. And like, I mean, you're still a teenager. That's a lot of money for a teenager.
Right.
And not that we didn't make mistakes. I mean, we definitely did. But I think having that responsibility and having jobs in high school and college, I mean, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through my freshman year of college because I didn't want to take out student loans. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and because of all of those decisions that we made when we were younger and dumber, but are directly from our parents and the influence they put in our life, we are set up better now as adults and parents and things like that than a lot of other people, especially military. Like it's just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about that because right, you're taking young kids and giving them, and it's the same thing, like I've heard the same thing in professional sports. Like they, and talk about money, like they come out of high school or college and get these amazing giant contracts and don't know how to handle that
Yeah.
amount of
I
money.
mean, I wish there's several things that, I mean, I wish we would have bought the first house that we rented because it was dirt cheap and we could be using that as a rental. And I wish we would have set up investments accounts when
Uh-huh.
we had, before we had kids, that we were spending that money. But all things considered, there's a lot of choices and decisions that we made when we were young and newly married that we would have done it differently. We'd be in a whole different place right now than we are.
Yeah. Okay, but not but and I want to steer the conversation in a little bit different direction because so you mentioned that your husband is military or was military when you first got married.
Tell me a little bit about that story
Tell me a little bit
because
about that story because the whole uh, premise of our show of the fine is a 4-letter word comes
Yeah.
from that story.
Yeah, so we met. He was fresh out of basic, had just gotten stationed at his duty station. I was fresh into freshman year of college, and we met. And honestly, like he is not my type whatsoever. I grew up on a farm. I only dated like cowboys and boys. I was going to like an ag school, so there was plenty of guys driving nice trucks and in jeans and boots. My husband, on the other hand, is like a total city slicker. He was driving a fast car that was loud, listened to rap music, like not my type. But somehow, like God knows who you're supposed to be with. And somehow, even though I think he maybe said 3 words
Uh-huh.
to me the first night we hung out, we ended up getting married. And he was in the army for 7 years. He wanted to do career. We were stationed at Fort Riley in Kansas for 4 years and then got stationed overseas in Germany. And right before we PCSed or moved to Germany, he got injured. And basically, his command was like, well, you have 2 options. You can either try to get it fixed here, but you're not going to move. Like, all of our stuff had already shipped. We already turned in our house. Like, we were literally within a month or two of moving. Or you can wait till you get over there and do something about it. And we were like, all of our stuff's already on its way to Germany. Like, this isn't a choice. So we went to
Right.
Germany,
Yeah.
and in hindsight, maybe we should have done something about it at Fort Riley. I don't know, because it took about another year for him to just get established. I mean, his unit that he was in Germany, they were training constantly. They were on missions and deployments and stuff like that. So it took about a year before he could really do anything about his knee injury. After that, he eventually had surgery on it and a couple more surgeries, and his dreams and like our plan was that he was going to do career turned into you're getting medically retired because it's your only option at this point. He has permanent nerve damage in his knee and leg now. He, I mean, he's had 4 surgeries, I think, on it, and just got referred back to the surgeon to check it out again. So he kind of didn't have an option at that point. So that was in, let's see, I think 2020 is kind of when our start. Well, 2019 is when he finally got referred to a surgeon and everything. He had surgery in 2021. But anyways, all this was happening. We were locked down COVID. Our first son was born overseas. And when he had surgery and then still had nothing was helping, he had nerve damage now, they were like, okay, we're going to med board you. So we were like, cool. We thought it was going to be like, he's out by Christmas. We made the decision as a family that me and our 1-year-old son were going to move back to the States to buy a house, get a job, find daycare, kind of like get everything set together. Because we knew when he was getting out that there was going to be a lot of uncertainty and I needed a job. So I moved from Germany back to Kansas with a 1-year-old, all of our luggage, and 2 dogs by myself.
Wow. That is some logistical planning
it was
and
crazy.
craziness.
It was also during COVID, so like we couldn't get, the only place we could get the dogs into was Denver or Chicago, which I think is about like 8 to 9 hours from where my parents lived in Kansas. So my dad and brother actually drove from Kansas to Chicago, met us in Chicago, and then we drove back. And yeah, we were all packed into this tiny car. Like I was exhausted.
Wait, I have to ask, because I have a feeling that what you're gonna say. What kind of
I have
dogs
an
are these?
Australian Shepherd, and he's half Aussie, half Border Collie. So they're not like massive dogs, but definitely not like.
Okay, I suspected they were
Yeah,
not going to
no.
be like poodles.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, my dad and brother drove us back to Kansas. Thank goodness, because I was in no state at that point to like drive or do anything. Like we were
Traveling.
Yeah, you've probably been traveling for 3 days.
We had, I think, like 3 or 4 different flights just to get from where we had in Germany, plus drive. Like we had to drive it. Yeah. I think we left at like 1 a.m. in the morning, and yeah, it was a couple of days before we finally landed in Chicago with like time changes and everything.
Jeez.
So,
And so then did your husband come shortly thereafter?
well, we thought he was supposed to be home in 4 months. And then COVID hit the section of Germany they were in really bad again, and they went back into lockdown. He couldn't get to the hospital where all his med boarding stuff was happening at. And it ended up being a year and a half before he got home finally. He was able.
So you didn't see him at all
No,
during
we
that
did.
time?
We got to see him for 3 weeks, almost exactly a year. So it was June and July of the next year. He was able to come home on leave finally for 3 weeks and see us, see our toddler at the time. We were luckily able to get pregnant, like we kind of planned, because I was at that point, I was like, screw the Army, like I'm not waiting. Luckily, we were able to get pregnant with our second during those couple of weeks. And then he had to go back, and he was back for now another 8 months before he finally was home for good. Yeah.
Okay. So was he home for the birth of
Yes,
your second child?
He made it home. He got home mid-February, and our second one was born on St. Patrick's Day. So he was home for, I think, about 3 weeks before the second one was born.
So no real time to adjust to
not at all.
family. Because you hadn't really spent much time with your first one, even because y'all came back and he didn't.
We did the math when he got home, and for the first 3 years of our oldest lives, he was home for 4 months of that.
And so he didn't even really know his
like
father.
He knew he was, and like
he was a stranger in his house, right?
And things like that. But there was no, like trust and bonding and that type of stuff. I mean, we left when he was 1. So even though they had those months during COVID, when we were locked down, and like they built that relationship, I mean, it was almost 2 years had gone by that Daddy wasn't there. Like Daddy is a guy on the phone that he talked to. Like that's.
Right. And I mean, it's such a formative time in a child's life that like you kind of have to wonder, all right, now is he developing like issues around dad's not home and like what does that mean
Yeah,
about
it
me?
was thankfully we were close to my parents. My dad and brother really stepped up. My brother actually moved in with us for a couple months in between like college and high school, which was amazing. And my parents, I mean, we spent, especially when I was pregnant, I was super sick during the second pregnancy. So we spent every weekend there because I was barely functioning.
Hmm.
And my dad
Yeah.
really stepped up, and he's
Yeah.
even made this comment since then, like after everything settled down, that he knew Mav needed a father figure in his life, and so he stepped up. I mean, while we were house hunting, I mean, we lived with them for 4 months too, so it's really it's been fun seeing the bond that my kids have with my dad, even though like the
Yeah.
first year of their life we were overseas and things like that. And on the flip side, like when my husband came home on leave and then left, like it was traumatizing. We had a couple opportunities after that for my
Hmm.
husband to come home for like a week or so. And because like my kids are not, like they're not violent. They're super sweet. I mean, a 3-year-old super sweet person, but like he was destroying the house, like literally tearing up flooring that we had just put down and like toys. And he just
Mm.
turned into honestly a monster. And it was directly because his daddy left. And like we knew that. So
Yeah.
we made the decision for Keegan to not come home, even though he had the opportunity in those 8 months, because we knew the effect it would have on the kid. And then on the flip
Yeah.
side, like it's taken,
Yeah.
I mean, he turns 5 this summer, and it's taken over a year since my husband's been out for him to really want daddy, like to want daddy over me.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about this in the pre-show interview. So tell me a little bit more because this is where it gets into the fine was not fine part of things in that transition of him coming
Yeah,
home and having to manage all of the issues that he had going on in his
yeah.
head,
I
your
mean,
husband.
I think just transitioning out of the military, especially when you've been in there for a hot minute, is hard to start with. Um, for my husband's, it was just there was multiple things added on. His injury and kind of not having a plan, and then going from having a really good, I mean, he had a good army career. Like he was a sergeant, he was getting promoted, his peers respected him. Like he had this whole team behind him that he literally knew would put their life on the line for him to come home and all of a sudden not have anybody. He was applying for jobs, and everybody's like, well, you spent 7 years of your life in the military, but you have no experience. And literally took him 9 months to get
Mm.
hired for a entry level general labor position. 9 months, like that's ridiculous. Um, then on top of that, I mean, he had mental PTSD from events that he saw during training and missions and things like that. And he also got out right as the Ukraine Russian war was happening. So he gets home, he's out of the army, he gets a couple weeks with his family. He's like, this is amazing. And then he watches every single one of our friends deploy. Every single one of our friends deployed.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, as a spouse, knowing what their spouses are going through, and I mean, we love our friends, like they're family. They've been family for the last almost 10 years for us. Watching them deploy was hard for
Yeah.
me, knowing what they could potentially be going through. But for him, watching his
Hmm.
soldiers and his teammates deploy was, I mean, the guilt was horrible. He was trying to
Mm.
figure out how he could get back in, and just all of that crushing on top of like just it was a mess. And then also going from being basically a bachelor for the last year and a half of his life to all of a sudden he has a wife and he has 2 kids. I mean, we had a newborn that screamed at us for the first 6 months of his life, like a toddler that is trying
Uh-huh.
to figure out who this guy is and build that relationship. It was hard for me. I mean, I put myself into therapy, and I've never been a therapy person, but I knew I was losing it, and he was in this pit of despair that I couldn't do anything about at that point. And I knew the kids needed somebody. So I had to do something for myself to, at least hold things together so not everything came crumbling down.
Yeah. Did the people around you know that this was what was going on inside your
My
family?
parents did, and my siblings. They knew some of it. A lot of the beginning stuff they didn't know. I didn't start kind of opening up and talking about how bad things were until I had to be honest. At one point, like we were at family vacation. My family takes like a group vacation every year. We were in Arizona and we rented this big Airbnb house. We were all together, and my husband basically kicked me out of the room that we were sleeping in that night. So I slept on the couch with the baby by myself. Um, and the next morning, I was in the kitchen with my mom. We were making breakfast. And I mean, I was upset. I mean, I was trying to hold it together because we were around family. And I mean, I didn't want to cause a whole thing, but like, I'm exhausted. The baby doesn't feel good. There's all this stuff going around. I mean, like when you're pent up and trying to hold things together, like it just, and my husband walked through the kitchen and I turned to say something to him and he said, "Don't fucking talk to me," and walked out in front of my mom. And like my husband would, one, he would never talk to me like that, but two, he definitely wouldn't do it in front of other people. Like if we're going to have a conversation, we're going to have it in private.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was just like, "What just happened?" So that's kind of when I started, talking to my mom a little bit. Like at that point, obviously she knew something was going on.
Yeah.
That was a couple months into it. So I think that was like May-ish when that happened. So he'd been home for 3 months. But it really didn't, yeah, I'd say between May and July is when it got really, really bad. And that's when I started. I mean, the VA put him on sleeping like melatonin because he wasn't sleeping and all these other things. And he would take melatonin, he would not wake up. There was 3 different instances where I could not get him to wake up.
Just from melatonin.
Yeah, and I don't think it was just the melatonin. I think it was a mixture. I mean, he was on nerve medicine also. He wasn't sleeping because of his, like at this point he hadn't gotten help for his mental problems. Like at that point I still, every time I left the house, like I was scared I'd come home and he'd be dead. I was scared to leave, like I would not leave the kids with him. If I had to go somewhere, they either went to daycare for the day, I got a babysitter, or they came with me. Like I would not, it wasn't that I didn't trust my husband, but I didn't trust my husband. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it. I get it. Did he know that you didn't trust
I
him?
think he probably did. And I think that was part of, I mean, he's not dumb. Like, I think it added to it. He didn't have a great fatherly example in his life. So he's always tried really, really hard to be a good dad. And like, I know that bugged him.
Yeah. At the same time, you knew he was struggling mentally and you couldn't in good conscience leave that with
and
him.
especially
Because you had told me in the beginning too, like he
yeah,
had a lot of anger and that the relationship he had with your 3-year-old was not
yeah,
completely
not at all.
harmonious.
He was fine with the baby, and I don't know really what the biggest difference was. Like the baby, he would be totally fine. Like the baby hated me the first couple months, and I would give him to my husband, and he would calm down. Like he would not. I couldn't calm him down. He was definitely like a daddy's boy. He still is. Um, but like I could give him to Keegan, and he would lay down and he would sleep on Keegan. So there was a lot of times for at least like the first 6 months, especially when he was having all his issues and just hated us. Like if you were there, you would understand. He's a completely different kid now. That Keegan would stay up with him during the nighttime because during the daytime, I mean, I had work. I was like, I'd started my own business. I had clients. I was taking care of the kids. And that's kind of a little bit of how he functioned. But he didn't sleep. Like he stayed up all night playing Xbox or watching videos on his phone. Even if the baby was sleeping, like he wasn't sleeping either. But yeah, I don't know what the biggest difference was, but like anything Mav would do would trigger him. Like the smallest things would trigger him. And whereas he was totally fine with the baby, like the baby could scream in his face and he was just like, okay, whatever. The toddler, like back talking him or not listening the first time would just he would go off.
Okay. All right. So at what point did you decide to get counseling, and how did you find your way to a counselor?
So I actually went to the doctor because I felt like I was having hormone issues after my baby was born. Um, and I don't know what I said or what she saw that made her suggest counseling, but she suggested, she was like, they might be able to help you. And I don't know if I was just at such a low and such a loss and didn't feel like for some reason, I reached out and they had a counselor that had availability and could schedule an appointment. And I was paying out of pocket. So it was like very affordable because like our insurance, I mean, we're on private insurance now. So insurance doesn't pay hardly anything. But there's just something that I don't know what it is because I'm not that type of person, or at least wasn't. But yeah, she suggested it and I was like, okay.
Yeah. And to me, hearing this is like divine guidance, like everything lined up exactly how
Yeah.
you needed it to.
And one of the biggest things like the counselor helped me with was I was comparing everything with the previous pregnancy and like when Matt was born. And she finally was like, but the situation's completely different. Like, you are not the same person. You guys are not in the same situation. He's completely different. You have 2 kids now instead of 1. Like, you can't. Because I was like, well, he used to do this and he used to help me with this. And like, he does this now that he didn't used to do. And she's like, well, it's not the same situation. Like, of course it's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah, this brings up a really good point, because a lot of people do this. Like, you think back and you go, well, but it was like this before. Why isn't it like this now? But we as humans are constantly changing. Like, we're changing, and anybody we're interacting with as friends, as partners, as family members, as colleagues are always changing. Like, you're not the same person you were yesterday.
So I think that was that at least helped me. And I think that helped me realize how bad his mental health, like his depression and his PTSD and his anxiety and everything else was. Because like I knew this wasn't the man that I married, and I knew this isn't him to a core. But there was a lot of just frustration and anger, and just like I was exhausted, and why am I not getting help?
I can imagine. Did you think that you would be able to get back to a relationship with the person he used to be? And I say that because we just said nobody is the same person they were yesterday. But I mean, to a harmonious relationship that that had you both growing in the same direction. Did you believe that you could get there, or were you thinking,
I knew if he could get help, then we could.
Good.
I knew that if he would refuse to get help, and like at that point, I had done everything in my power to help him. Like it had to be a conscious effort and decision on his part. I knew that if he would make that decision and get help, then we could get back to where we are. I just like it had to be his decision, and I didn't know how to do that.
And so how did that come about, that he decided to get help? Like, how did you manage your side? Because obviously this is your story, but how did you manage your side to help him see that he needed to get help?
We had an incident where he hit our oldest son, and I said, enough is enough. You either go get help, or I will take the kids and I will leave, and I will take you for everything because I know how to do it. And I'm not the type of person. I'm not the type of person to threaten and to even like, I don't want to get divorced. That's not, and he knows that, like, he knows how I feel about it. But I could take a lot of his anger and frustration towards me. He never once hit me. Like, that was the only time he hit one of the kids. Because he also knows that if he ever hits me, like, I'm done. But that was my ultimatum. Like, you don't touch my kids. And I can take a lot of frustration and anger and you putting it out on me, but you're not going to do that to my kids. And you're not going to, yeah, that was the final straw. And he's told me since then, like,
Mhm.
he's been in therapy ever since. We're better now than we ever have been, and we're growing amazingly as a couple and a family and individually. But he has told me since then that he hated me at that point. For those couple months, he hated me. And he could have cared less if I was there or not, but he wasn't going to do that to his kids. Like his kids are the reason that he woke up and went and got help.
Okay. And that's common too, that that's the incentive. And right, nothing wrong with that. Like whatever it's
Like,
going to
I'm totally
take
fine that he hated me.
for you to go get help, right?
He needed somebody to put his anger out, and I was there, and he knew that I was safe, and yeah, it sucked at that time, but I'm fine with that if that's what it took for him to get help and to get better and be the person he is, because he's an amazing man. He's an amazing husband, and he's an amazing parent. Like,
Mhm.
he amazes me every day. And if that's what it took for him to get
Yeah.
back to himself, like, it didn't even hurt my feelings.
Mhm. You're right, right. I get it. Like you were willing to make that sacrifice almost. And we've talked on the show too about like that word sacrifice. Like what does that even mean? What is the definition of it? And it has so many different definitions, but when we apply it to this situation, it's like you were willing to like take it's not even, I don't want to say the word abuse because that's not really what we're talking about, but to be the sounding
Yeah.
board for his anger.
Because I know who he is to his core. And I knew that even with everything that was going on, if he got help, then we could get back to being us.
Yeah.
Somebody, I think it was my grandmother or somebody
Yeah.
ages ago, said you don't have to love your partner every single day, but you do have to make the conscious decision to like them. And that's always stuck.
Wow.
Like every time we have a fight or anything happens, that's always stuck. Like, I don't necessarily love you right now, but I still like you as a person.
I could see that being turned around the other way. Like you don't have to like the person all the time, but maintaining that love is
Yeah.
different.
But I understand the whole concept
But
of
I
it.
understand the whole concept of it is like, I don't like what you're doing. I
Yeah.
don't like how you're acting. I still love you as a person. Or in your case, like, I don't
how you're acting.
love how you're acting.
Yeah.
But knowing who you are at your core, I can still see your soul and I can
Yeah.
still love and respect
Absolutely.
that.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So what are you doing now to maintain your sense of balance? And what are you doing now to help others do the same?
One of the biggest things for others is I don't want them to think it like they're alone. I had so many, I mean, I was working for the Air Force when my husband got out of the Army, and I had so many retired Air Forces veterans warn me of what might happen. Like, warn me he's going to go through this spiral and he's going to be depressed, and just keep an eye on them, be there for him. I had so many veterans tell me that. But when I was in the trenches and going through this with him, there was nobody to talk to as a spouse. I mean, I had my Army spouse friends that I could kind of talk to, but they haven't been through it. And there's kind of this dissociation that goes on when you get out of the military, where, I mean, I felt it myself as a civilian and a spouse, where you go from being a part of this community and this brotherhood. And like for me, I mean, they're basically family. Like, there's been moments in my life and my friends' lives that normally family would be a part of, but because we're stationed overseas and family can't be there, or in another state, that you become family. And all of a sudden that's kind of ripped away from you. Like, your entire identity is ripped away from you. Like, I was an Army spouse for 7 years. And all of a sudden, like, I'm not an Army spouse. I mean, I am, but I'm not.
Right.
So there's things you can talk about to your friends, but like, unless you've been through this, I had a hard time finding a community of spouses that have gone through this with their husbands when they got transitioned out of the military.
See, that sounds that's so
I'll just use that word.
unbelievable. I'll just use that word because so many people have been through it. And so where is the support network of other people who have been through it to help those who are going through it
And
now?
full honestly, like it might have been moved back to kind of not my hometown, but like a small town nearby it. There wasn't a lot of military. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
were 30 minutes from an Air Force base, but there's also a difference. I mean, if you're Army and Air Force, you know, there's a difference.
Right, right. Yeah,
Um,
I know.
and like I'm still on all the military spouse Facebook pages for the area, but their husbands are still currently serving. So I don't know if it's just this weird
Yeah.
stigma where we don't talk about it and like we don't want to talk about the trauma and that we and our spouses go through in the transition and how hard it is because everybody wants to just I don't know what it is. Um
Yeah.
but it's hard. Like
Yeah,
yeah.
I believe you. Yeah. So are you looking at doing something like creating a community for, to help others or like what do you see happening for your future professionally? Or I mean personally, they're
Yeah,
so intertwined.
I think building a Facebook group and as military like Facebook's a huge part of how we kind of stay in touch with everybody. Um, would be
Mhm.
amazing, and I'd love to like spearhead that if there's others out there that would love to be a part of it. Um, but also, I try to stay somewhat active in the nearby. Like we moved back to Fort Riley area, and when there's questions that come up or like spouses looking for friends and things like that, like I try to answer those questions and just be there as a sounding board.
Yeah.
I think especially like when we're in the depths of it, we don't want other people to know how horrible our life is going at the moment. So it's really
Right,
hard to
right.
reach out and ask for help, but just knowing that there's somebody there that is more than willing to help is huge.
Yeah, and normalizing what you're
Yeah.
going through. And yeah, okay, I get you don't want to talk about it. And this is normal. So let's talk about it so that you don't end up with all kinds of physical and mental
Yeah, and like
issues.
on the spouses side of things too, there needs to be more initiatives. Like there's so many initiatives going on currently for military spouses, especially like getting jobs. I mean, I had a job, did not have a job for 2 years in Germany because there was no jobs available. And there's so many initiatives out here going
Mm,
on for current military spouses who are moving and changing jobs every 2 years because of the military. But then when you get out, you're not classified as a military spouse anymore. So you don't qualify for any of those
mm,
benefits. Like,
mm.
that's insane. You still have a job
Yeah,
history of changing every 2 years or no job history because there's not daycare available and there's not jobs available and nobody wants to hire
yeah,
you. But then, yeah,
right. It seems like there's an opportunity for you if you're willing to take it
I'm
there.
thinking of people I already know. And I'm like, wait, we should be talking about this more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am so grateful for you coming on the show to talk about it and to put it out there and help um help people know what's going on and how they might be able to help others. There's that grandfather clock that I can't mute myself from because I'm in the middle of talking. Um, so if you're hearing this grandfather clock thing going on, that's what it is. I'm at a house right now that has a grandfather clock that goes off every 15 minutes. All right. So yes, I'm grateful for you coming on and sharing your story to help other people one know they're not alone and to know that there's nothing wrong with them and that there are resources, so if somebody wanted to continue, well, let me ask you the other question first and then I'll ask how somebody can reach out to you. The now famous question, what's your hype song? What's the song you listened to or still listen to when you needed to pull yourself up and get an extra boost of
So there's
energy?
kind of two. My like go-to is Taylor Swift. She's the man.
Oh,
Um,
good one.
I know,
Oh,
right?
good
I
one.
mean, I love all of her music, but that one's always a good one.
Yes.
The one I've been thinking about this, and while I was like going through all of this with my husband and kids and just life, I listened to Queens and Kings on repeat. And I don't remember who sings it, but there was like a lyric in there, like "You're the queen or the king" or something. Um, but I would like listen to that
Uh-huh.
on repeat in the car when I was by myself, and it was just like, "You can do this. Like, it's okay. You can
Yeah.
do this. You got it."
Yeah. So much inspiration in song. And that's why I ask that question, is because I'm always intrigued by what lyrics or what songs, really touch people. So thank you for that. I will put links to both of those songs in the show notes. And then now, if somebody wants to continue a conversation with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Facebook or Instagram. You can find me at Luvyna Mantle, and I'm the only
Okay.
Luvyna Mantle that's out there, so it should be
That's
fairly
shocking.
easy.
That's shocking.
I know, crazy, right?
All
um,
right.
but yeah, those
All
are the
right.
best places. I'm always active on social media, so
Cool. I will include those links in show notes as well. Lou, thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a
yeah. Thank you so
four-letter
much for
word.
letting me share my story and just get out there in front of people to tell it's okay. Like, it's okay to talk about this.